The autumn breeze swept through Madison Avenue as Olivia Thompson carefully arranged her watercolor paintings along the iron fence of Central Park. Her trembling hands betrayed the exhaustion she felt after another round of chemotherapy, but she forced a smile as she watched her 4-year-old son, Tommy, playing with fallen leaves nearby. The bright orange and red hues of the leaves matched the sunset-themed painting she had just positioned. One of her best works, she thought, created during those long hours in the hospital's chemotherapy ward. At 28, Olivia never imagined she'd be fighting breast cancer while raising a child alone. The diagnosis had come just 6 months ago, turning her already challenging life upside down. The medical bills piled up faster than she could count, and her part-time job at the local library barely covered their tiny studio apartment's rent. Her artwork had become their lifeline, though sales were unpredictable at best. "Mommy, look what I found!" Tommy's excited voice pulled her from her thoughts as he ran toward her, clutching a perfectly shaped maple leaf. His curly brown hair bounced with each step, so much like his father's, the man who disappeared the moment Olivia told him she was pregnant. She pushed that memory aside, focusing instead on her son's bright blue eyes and infectious smile. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she said, carefully tucking the leaf into her sketch folder. "Maybe we can paint it together later." The joy in Tommy's eyes was worth every moment of struggle. He was her reason for fighting, for getting up each morning despite the nausea and fatigue that accompanied her treatments. Mrs. Henderson, their elderly neighbor who often watched Tommy during Olivia's treatments, had told her just yesterday, "You're the strongest person I know, dear." But Olivia didn't feel strong as she struggled to keep her hand steady while arranging her paintings. Each piece represented hours of work, completed between hospital visits and the exhausting side effects of chemotherapy. As the evening crowd began filling the sidewalks, Olivia arranged her remaining paintings, each one telling a story of hope and resilience. There were cityscapes captured during sleepless nights, portraits of Tommy painted during better days, and abstract pieces that expressed her fears and dreams in swirls of color. A middle-aged woman stopped to admire a painting of Central Park in spring, but walked away without purchasing. Olivia's heart sank slightly. She needed to make at least 2 sales today to afford next week's medication. The weight of her situation pressed heavily on her shoulders. Last week's medical bill had nearly emptied their small savings account, and the upcoming chemotherapy session loomed like a dark cloud. The social worker at the hospital had helped her apply for additional assistance, but the paperwork moved slowly through the system, and her needs were immediate and pressing. Tommy sat on their old blanket, carefully coloring in his second-hand sketchbook. He'd inherited his mother's artistic talent, creating wonderful little drawings that Olivia proudly displayed in their apartment. She watched him while adjusting her wool hat, which covered her nearly bald head, a stark reminder of her ongoing battle. Despite everything, Tommy remained remarkably resilient, adapting to their new reality with the innocent flexibility of childhood. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across their small display as Olivia remembered the day's earlier doctor's appointment. The oncologist had been cautiously optimistic about her response to treatment, but the words aggressive approach and intensive care still echoed in her mind. The cost of the recommended treatment plan seemed insurmountable, but she had to try, for Tommy. "Excuse me," a deep voice suddenly spoke, causing Olivia to turn around. A tall man in a charcoal grey suit stood before her largest painting, a dramatic sunset over the Manhattan skyline. His presence commanded attention, but it was the sadness in his eyes that caught Olivia's attention. "This piece, it's extraordinary, the way you've captured the light." James Mitchell had walked this path hundreds of times over the past 7 years, each step a reminder of the wife he'd lost to the same disease he now recognized in the young artist's tired eyes. He'd been drawn to the painting's familiar view. It was Catherine's favorite spot in the city, where they'd spent countless evenings watching the sun sink behind the skyscrapers. The painting captured more than just the physical beauty of the scene. It somehow conveyed the emotional weight of the moment, the hope and melancholy that accompanied each sunset. James found himself transfixed by the delicate brushstrokes and the subtle interplay of colors that seemed to tell a story beyond the visible image. As he studied the artwork, Tommy approached, curious about the stranger admiring his mother's painting. "My mommy made that one in the hospital," he announced proudly, causing Olivia to flush with embarrassment. James's expression shifted, a mix of surprise and something deeper, more personal, crossing his features. The autumn wind picked up, causing several smaller paintings to flutter. As Olivia rushed to secure them, a wave of dizziness struck her. She stumbled, and in an instant, James's strong hands were steadying her. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. In his gentle grip, Olivia felt something she hadn't experienced in years: safety. "Perhaps you should sit down," James suggested, his voice filled with genuine concern. As he helped her to the blanket, he noticed the medical bracelet on her wrist, the date of her last treatment clearly visible. His heart clenched, memories of similar bracelets on Catherine's wrist flooding back. Tommy watched the interaction with innocent curiosity, offering his mother the water bottle from their small cooler. The simple gesture spoke volumes about their relationship, about how this young boy had learned to be his mother's caretaker far too early in life. As the streetlights began to flicker on, casting long shadows across the park's entrance, James found himself unable to walk away. There was something about this small family that pulled at him, awakening feelings he'd thought long buried. He looked at the sunset painting again, then at Olivia's determined face as she tried to maintain her composure despite her obvious exhaustion. The decision he made in that moment would change all their lives forever, though none of them knew it yet. As the city settled into its evening rhythm, fate had orchestrated a meeting between two souls who understood loss, struggle, and the power of unexpected hope. The painting that had caught James's eye would become more than just artwork. It would become the first chapter of an extraordinary story that was just beginning to unfold. James couldn't take his eyes off the sunset painting, his fingers tracing the edge of the canvas with reverence. "How much?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before Olivia could respond, another dizzy spell hit her, more intense than the last. Tommy clutched his mother's hand, his small face creased with worry, an expression no 4-year-old should have to wear. "Mrs. Thompson, I insist you let me help," James said, quickly gathering her paintings as the first drops of rain began to fall. "Where's your car?" The question made Olivia's cheeks burn with embarrassment. They'd taken the bus here as they did everywhere. The subway stairs had become too difficult for her to manage on treatment days. "We usually take the bus," Tommy answered innocently, already helping to pack his mother's art supplies into their weathered canvas bag. "But Mommy's too tired today. She had the medicine that makes her sick." The brutal honesty of children, Olivia thought, watching James's expression soften even further. "Please, allow me to drive you home." It wasn't really a question, and Olivia found herself too exhausted to argue. As James called his driver, she noticed his wedding ring was missing, but the pale band of skin on his finger told its own story. Within minutes, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. Their tiny studio apartment in Queens felt even smaller when James helped them inside. The walls were covered with Olivia's paintings and Tommy's drawings, their own private gallery. Medical bills and insurance documents were carefully stacked on their small dining table, next to a pile of overdue notices that made Olivia's stomach clench. "You have remarkable talent," James said, examining the paintings that decorated their walls. His eyes lingered on a particular piece, a portrait of Tommy laughing, his joy captured perfectly in vibrant watercolors. "How long have you been painting?" "Since I was Tommy's age," Olivia replied, sinking into their worn armchair. "It was always my escape. Now it's our survival." She hadn't meant to be so honest, but something about James's presence made her walls crumble. Tommy had already taken to him, showing him his collection of toy cars, mostly second-hand finds from local thrift stores. James listened as Olivia explained how she'd discovered the lump during a self-exam, how the diagnosis had come just as she'd been planning to enroll Tommy in preschool. Her insurance covered only the basics, leaving them struggling with the mounting costs of more aggressive treatment options. Through it all, she'd continued painting, selling her work wherever she could. Street corners, local cafes, online when she had the energy to post. "The sunset painting," James finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "It reminds me of my late wife, Catherine. He paused, collecting himself. "She passed away from breast cancer 7 years ago. We used to watch the sunset from that exact spot in Central Park." The revelation hung in the air between them. Tommy, sensing the heaviness in the room, climbed into his mother's lap, his small arms wrapping around her neck. "Mommy's going to get better," he declared with the absolute certainty only a child could possess. "She promised." James watched their interaction, memories of Catherine flooding back, the same determination in her eyes, the same fight to stay alive. But Catherine had been diagnosed too late. By the time they caught it, the cancer had already spread. Looking at Olivia, he saw a chance to help someone else win this battle. "I want to buy your paintings," he said suddenly. "All of them." Olivia started to protest, but he continued. "I'm opening a new gallery in Soho next month. Your work deserves to be seen by serious collectors, not just passers-by in the park." The offer was unexpected and overwhelming. Olivia's head spun with possibilities. The medical bills she could pay, the treatment she could afford, maybe even a better apartment for Tommy. But pride made her hesitate. "I don't want charity, Mr. Mitchell." "James, please," he corrected gently. "And this isn't charity. Your work is exceptional, Olivia. I've been in the art world for 20 years. I know talent when I see it. The emotion you capture, the way you use light and shadow, it's remarkable. Let me help you share it with the world." As if to emphasize his point, Tommy tugged at James's sleeve, leading him to a corner where Olivia kept her most recent works. These were different, raw, powerful pieces created during her darkest moments in the hospital. James stood transfixed before a particular painting, a series of shadows and light representing the chemotherapy ward, somehow managing to convey both despair and hope in the same strokes. "This is what the art world needs," James said softly. "Real emotion, real struggles, real triumph. Not just pretty pictures, but stories that move people." He turned to face her, his expression earnest. "Let me help you tell your story, Olivia." The proposition felt like a lifeline, but also terrified her. Success could mean everything for Tommy's future, for her treatment options. Failure. She couldn't bear to think about failure. As if reading her thoughts, James added, "Catherine always said that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is accept help when it's offered." Tommy had fallen asleep in Olivia's lap, his small body warm against hers. She stroked his curls, thinking about all the times she'd had to leave him with Mrs. Henderson during treatments, all the nights she'd heard him praying for her to get better. Maybe it was time to be brave in a different way. "Okay," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "But I need to know something first." James waited patiently as she gathered her courage. "Why are you really doing this? Is it because of Catherine?" His answer would determine everything that followed, though neither of them fully understood that yet. The rain continued to fall outside their window, creating a gentle backdrop to this moment that would change all their lives forever. James sat quietly for a moment, considering Olivia's question. "Catherine taught me that life is too short to walk past opportunities to help others," he finally answered. "But your talent stands on its own merit, Olivia. I'd be a fool to let it go unrecognized." 3 weeks had passed since that rainy evening, and Olivia's life had transformed dramatically. James had not only purchased her entire collection, but had also arranged for her to work from a small studio space near his gallery. The income from the sales had allowed her to start a more aggressive treatment plan, giving her renewed hope in her fight against cancer. However, life had a way of throwing unexpected challenges. On a particularly busy morning, as Olivia prepared for her gallery showing, she received an unsettling phone call. David Walker, Tommy's father, had somehow discovered her upcoming exhibition and was demanding to be part of their lives again. The news sent her into a panic attack, memories of his abandonment flooding back. "He has no right," she whispered to herself, hands shaking as she tried to continue painting. The studio James had provided had become her sanctuary, filled with natural light and the scent of oil paints. Tommy played happily in his designated corner, surrounded by art supplies and his favorite toys, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in his mother's mind. James found her there, struggling to maintain her composure. "Olivia?" His voice carried concern as he noticed her distress. Over the past weeks, their professional relationship had developed into a deep friendship, though both carefully avoided acknowledging the growing attraction between them. The way his hand would linger when helping her arrange canvases, how her heart would race when he brought her coffee in the mornings, these moments remained unspoken between them. "Tommy's father," she managed to explain, the paintbrush trembling in her hand. "He saw the gallery promotion and—" She couldn't continue. James's expression darkened, protective instinct flaring. He had learned about David's abandonment during their many conversations, how he'd walked away when Olivia needed him most. "What does he want?" James asked, his usual calm demeanor tensed. Tommy looked up from his drawing, sensing the adult's distress. "Ice cream, Mommy?" he asked hopefully, his innocent request breaking the tension. James couldn't help but smile despite the situation. At the ice cream parlor, while Tommy happily devoured a chocolate sundae, Olivia shared the whole story. David had been her college sweetheart, but when she became pregnant, he'd claimed he wasn't ready for responsibility. Now suddenly, he wanted to make things right. He's seen the gallery promotions, Olivia explained bitterly. Suddenly, I'm not just the struggling single mother he abandoned. Now I'm an upcoming artist, with a showing at a prestigious gallery, her hands clenched around her untouched ice cream cup. He even had the nerve to suggest he should be at the opening, to support his family. James reached across the table, his hand covering hers. You don't owe him anything, Olivia. The man who walks away loses his right to walk back in when things get better. The warmth of his touch sent a flutter through her chest, a feeling she'd been trying to ignore. But life had more surprises in store. As they left the ice cream parlor, Olivia collapsed. The stress of the situation, combined with her recent treatment, had proven too much. James caught her before she hit the ground, Tommy's frightened cry piercing the air. The world spun around her as consciousness faded. James's worried face the last thing she saw. The hospital corridor felt endless as James paced, Tommy sleeping fitfully in a nearby chair. The doctors had discovered that Olivia's cancer was more aggressive than initially thought. She needed immediate surgery, followed by an intensive round of treatments. The cost would be astronomical even with insurance. When Olivia regained consciousness, she found James holding her hand, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. Tommy had been taken home by Mrs. Henderson, who'd rushed to the hospital to help. The doctors told me everything, James said softly, and I've already taken care of the medical bills. James, no, Olivia protested weakly. That's too much. The gallery space, the studio, and now this. I can't accept. 7 years ago, James interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. I watched Catherine refuse help because she didn't want to be a burden. She was so strong, so independent. By the time she finally accepted support, it was too late. He squeezed her hand gently. Don't make the same mistake. Let me help you fight this. In that moment, looking into his eyes, Olivia saw something that both thrilled and terrified her. This wasn't just about Catherine anymore. James had fallen in love with her, and perhaps even more importantly, with Tommy. The realization made her heart race, setting off the monitoring machines. As nurses rushed in to check on her, Olivia made a decision. She would accept James's help, but she needed to be completely honest with him. Once the medical staff left, she took a deep breath. There's something you need to know about David, she began. He's not just trying to come back into our lives. He's threatening to sue for partial custody of Tommy. The revelation hung heavy in the air. James stood silently for a moment, then pulled out his phone. I'll have my lawyers handle it, he said firmly. But first, there's something I need to tell you, too. He hesitated, then continued. The real reason I was walking in Central Park that day, I was going to scatter Catherine's ashes. She made me promise to wait 7 years to make sure I was ready to let go. I had the urn in my office, but when I saw your painting, when I saw you and Tommy, I realized I was ready for more than just letting go. I was ready to love again. The monitor betrayed Olivia's racing heart as James leaned closer, but before he could speak further, a commotion erupted in the hallway. David had arrived at the hospital, demanding to see his son. His loud voice carried through the door, creating a scene that would force everyone to confront their past and future choices. The moment was interrupted by a nurse rushing in, her face concerned. Mrs. Thompson, your latest test results have just come in, she said urgently. The doctor needs to speak with you immediately. The look on her face suggested news that would change everything, news that would force all of them to make decisions they never expected to face. As security tried to handle David's disruption outside, and the nurse waited anxiously by the door, James made a decision that would alter all their lives forever, though none of them could predict exactly how. The next few moments would determine not just Olivia's future, but Tommy's as well, as past and present collided in the sterile hospital corridor. Olivia's test results revealed something unexpected. Her body was responding remarkably well to the new treatment protocol James had helped her access. The aggressive cancer cells were showing significant reduction, something her doctor called unprecedented given her previous condition. As the physician explained the promising development, David's voice could still be heard arguing with security in the hallway. This doesn't mean we're out of the woods, the doctor cautioned, but it's the best news we could hope for at this stage. James squeezed Olivia's hand, tears of relief shining in his eyes. This was the kind of news Catherine never got to hear. The moment was interrupted, as David finally managed to push his way into the room, his expensive suit and carefully styled hair a stark contrast to James's rumpled appearance from spending the night at the hospital. "Olivia," David started, then stopped short at the sight of James protectively standing beside her bed. "You need to leave," James said firmly, his voice low but commanding. David's face reddened with anger. "I have every right to be here. That's my son out there, and this is about my family." "Family?" Olivia's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Despite her weakness, she pushed herself up in the hospital bed. "Where was this concern for family when I told you I was pregnant? Where were you during the midnight feedings, the first steps, the nightmares? Where were you 3 months ago when I was diagnosed with cancer?" David had the grace to look ashamed, but pressed on. "I've changed. Seeing your success, seeing how well Tommy's doing, I want to make things right. I have money now, I can help." "The time for that has passed," James interjected, his hand still firmly holding Olivia's. "Tommy has all the love and support he needs." The possessive tone in his voice made Olivia's heart skip a beat, registering on the heart monitor and drawing everyone's attention. "Who are you to make that decision?" David demanded, stepping forward aggressively. "Some art dealer playing savior? You think buying her paintings gives you the right to play daddy to my kid?" "No," James replied calmly, "but loving them does." The words hung in the air, causing Olivia's breath to catch. He turned to her, his eyes full of emotion. "I love you, Olivia. I love Tommy. And I know it's soon. I know there's so much happening. But when Catherine was sick, I learned that life is too precious to waste time hiding from love." David scoffed, but before he could speak, Tommy's small voice came from the doorway where Mrs. Henderson stood with him. "Mommy, who's that angry man?" he asked, clutching his favorite stuffed bear, a gift from James. David's face softened at the sight of his son, but Tommy shrank back, moving closer to Mrs. Henderson. "That's enough," Olivia said firmly. "David, you gave up your rights to be in our lives 4 years ago. You don't get to walk back in now because you think I'm suddenly worthy of your attention. I'll fight you for custody," David threatened, but his voice wavered as Tommy buried his face in Mrs. Henderson's skirt, clearly frightened by his biological father's angry tone. "No, you won't," James said, pulling out his phone, "because I've already contacted my lawyers. They've documented your abandonment, your complete lack of contact or support for 4 years. They've also documented every threat you've made since discovering Olivia's gallery showing. Fight this, and you'll lose more than just custody rights. You'll lose your reputation, your social standing, everything you clearly value more than family." The color drained from David's face as he realized the implications. His new life, his carefully cultivated image, would be shattered by a public custody battle that would expose his past actions. Without another word, he turned and left the room, brushing past Tommy without even a glance. Tommy immediately ran to his mother's bedside, climbing up next to her with James's help. "Is the angry man gone?" he asked, snuggling close to Olivia. "Yes, sweetheart," she assured him, holding him tight. "He won't bother us again." Mrs. Henderson quietly excused herself, leaving the 3 of them alone. James sat on the edge of the bed, completing their small circle. "I meant what I said," he spoke softly. "I love you both. Catherine sent me to that spot in the park that day. I know she did. She knew I needed to find you, to learn to love again." Olivia looked at Tommy, who was already comfortable leaning against James as if he belonged there. "James," she started, tears filling her eyes, "I love you too, but this journey isn't over. I'm still fighting cancer, still uncertain about the future." "Then we'll fight it together," James replied, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Maybe this isn't perfect timing, but—" He opened the box, revealing a delicate ring. "Marry me, Olivia. Let me love you and Tommy for the rest of our lives." Tommy's eyes widened at the sparkling ring. "Are you going to be my daddy?" he asked James hopefully. James's eyes filled with tears as he looked at the little boy who had already claimed his heart. "If you'll have me, buddy." Olivia looked at the ring, then at her son's hopeful face, and finally at James, the man who had walked into their lives when they needed him most, the man who had proven his love not just with words and gifts, but with unwavering support and presence. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes," to both questions. As James slipped the ring onto her finger and gathered both her and Tommy into his arms, Olivia felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. The journey ahead would still have its challenges, but she was no longer facing them alone. 6 months later, Olivia stood in front of her largest painting yet, a piece that dominated the wall of their new home. It showed 3 figures watching a sunset over Central Park, their silhouettes merged together as one. Her hair had grown back, curling softly around her face, and her latest scans showed no signs of cancer. Tommy had started kindergarten, proudly telling everyone about his new daddy who picked him up every afternoon. Life wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. A masterpiece painted with love, hope, and the kind of joy that only comes after knowing true struggle. As James wrapped his arms around her from behind, kissing her neck softly, Olivia smiled. Sometimes the most beautiful works of art came from the darkest moments, and their love story was her greatest masterpiece of all.